got the cornfield calm, Midwest tone, but he's spitting facts like a dog with a bone. Lanky frame, fire-haired eyes on the case, breaking down the game in the darkest place. Sports scores to murder boards, Hoosier logic cuts like swords. From Friday lights to chalked out lines, this redhead's brain rewrites the lines. Inside the Hoosier mind, where the stories twist and stats unwind. He's a legend in flannel, mic in hand, digging deep where few can stand. From touchdowns to crime scenes raw, he's got the truth in every draw. Yeah, step in if you dare to find what's brewing inside the Hoosier mind. He'll talk Pacers, Colts, or Colts on trial. Hoosier humor with a devilish smile. He's that redhead sleuth with a box of clues. Takes your headline, breaks the news. With every stat and every scream, he's painting portraits in your stream. Don't blink, he'll tie it tight. From game night wins to murder fight. Inside the Hoosier mind, where the facts hit hard and the lines are blind. He's a ginger ninja, smooth and slick, cracking cases play by play quick. From courtrooms to the hardwood floor, he digs for more than just the score. Tune in and don't rewind, you're deep now inside the Hoosier mind.
All right, what's up, y'all? Welcome into Inside the Hoosier Mind, brought to you by Military Broadcast Radio, helping give veterans a voice, helping teach them how to podcast, and most importantly, having veterans' voices be heard. Back from a crazy week 7 of college football. So many major news that has come out from college football since then. We've had coaches fired, we've had teams drop from the top 25, and it's been a little bit of a whirlwind, and you kind of have to love that about college football, because you never know what you're going to expect. There's almost always an upset. Something is always changing about it, but it's a beautiful thing too, because it's so fluid and you never know what to truly expect out of it. And probably one of the first things we're going to dive into as far as the show goes. And if MJ is watching, and MJ, I already feel for your pain. I have a buddy that is from upstate New York who's a diehard Penn State fan. He had some mixed feelings mostly after the UCLA loss. He wasn't as upset about the Oregon loss, but after the Northwestern loss, I texted him. I said, "Well, buddy, you're free." And he goes, "Yeah, but we're $50 million in debt now as a result of that," which supposedly that may or may not get some assistance due to Adidas, but I don't know how true that report is. We'll have to see, especially since Penn State is in the midst of making a uniform change to boot. So let's just dive into some of the coaches being fired, at least. And obviously James Franklin is the biggest highlight of them all, with him finally getting the boot from Penn State after 11 years with the team. He was hired on in 2014 and released 6 games into the season after they are 3-3. And they've lost 3 games in a row, including Oregon, UCLA, and then this most recent one to Northwestern. For anybody who's watched the show pretty regularly, I've asked this question as far back as when the college football playoff started last year and Penn State was in, because Penn State had the easiest road, at least to the quarterfinals. You know, they were going to be a top 4 team left when it was all said and done, because they honestly, they had the luck of the draw. They had the easiest route. They had to take on SMU and they had to take on Boise State, 2 schools that SMU just recently moved from the group of 5 up to a, Power 4 status. So, and they kind of had the benefit of a pretty easy ACC schedule. And then to boot, you also had Boise State, who they're riding Ashton Genty's coattails, and, hats off to them. But once you shut Ashton Genty down, which is what Penn State did, Boise State was pretty average, and they looked like a school that was going to be, overwhelmed by, the immense talent and the great players that Penn State has. And so to me last year, it's like, man, if y'all don't at least make the Natty, I don't know. I don't know if James Franklin stays. And for some people, they kind of argued, why would Penn State get rid of him? Because he has been successful. And when you look at his actual record there at Penn State, he only has truly two losing, well, actually, officially one losing season. Other than that, including the bowl games that he went to, he would at minimum get 7 wins. His first 2 years, he was 7-6. Had a breakout year in 2016. That's the year they beat Ohio State. They went 11-3. One of those losses being to the Rose Bowl, but they won the Big Ten championship that year. They beat Ohio State with Saquon Barkley. Went 11-2 the next year. 9-4, 11-2. Now, COVID was his first true losing season, but they only played 9 games. They went 4-5 in that one. 2021, kind of another rough year. They went 7-6, then 11-2, 10-3, 13-3, and then, of course, this year 3-3 to start the season. So, I mean, he was good for Penn State. He was 104-45 there at Penn State. He was 64-36. To me, what really made me question about him getting fired, would he potentially get fired, was he only had the 1 win against Ohio State. He only had 3 wins against Michigan. And he hadn't beat Oregon. Now, Oregon's only been in the conference now going into year 2. Yeah, us talking. I do and I don't. It's one of those, he is good. I'm not going to discredit him. He is a good coach, and he definitely brought the program back to a national spotlight that it needed after the whole Sandusky situation and all the sanctions and everything that happened. He was a good steady ship to, or guide to really steady the ship and put it in the direction that he needed to go. And obviously Penn State has recruited and made some phenomenal college, even into the NFL players. You look at Micah Parsons, you look at Saquon Barkley, he rushed for over 2,000 yards last year. Micah has been dominant. Abdul Carter, for all intents and purposes, as far as we know, is going to continue to be dominant. I know Joey Porter Jr. is one. He was great at Penn State. Hasn't really had a chance to truly shine in Pittsburgh, I don't think, or if he has, there's nothing that's really been eye-popping or turning heads. Miles Sanders, you could also consider as far as running backs go. The big question to me is, as decent as Penn State has been and as many players and as many talented players as they've had, you don't really hear a lot as far as Penn State quarterbacks go. And I don't know if that does play a factor or not. And it could just be more feeding into, you look at Ohio State, they're churning out quote unquote first round quarterbacks constantly when they don't last very long. Alabama's the same way. It has always seemed that Penn State had a ton of talent, but it definitely seemed as though both the committee, even draft stock, NFL GMs and whatnot, didn't necessarily believe in Penn State quarterbacks. Don't know why. I know Drew Aller had a lot of potential, a lot of hype at the beginning of the season as far as potentially being a first rounder. I didn't personally see it. I didn't see it last year. I didn't even see it the year before when he was starting. It was one of those, he's solid, but nothing he's really doing, in my opinion, is making me turn heads to be like, oh man, Drew Aller at Penn State is really gonna be the guy that turns the program around. And again, that's just me. So when the news came out that James Franklin was finally fired, my biggest question to this, even when when I asked the question months ago of should he be fired, when are they going to move on? The biggest, kind of backfiring question to me, and that I even have asking, is who do you go and get in the meantime if you do fire James Franklin? Because when I look at college football's landscape right now as it is, I even look at the NFL's landscape, we're not seeing the old-timer coaches that have been around the league for a hot minute or have been somewhere consistently and then let go, and then they go and get another shot. It's a lot of guys that we see make an immediate impact, or they, have a good couple years as coordinators, and then they move on and become head coaches. And some of them are really successful and some of them aren't. I'm really not seeing that right now out of the NFL or out of college. When I look at the college football landscape right now, there's not really an offensive coordinator to me, other than maybe Brian Hartline, But does he want to leave Ohio State to go become the head coach of Penn State, knowing you're going to have to face Ohio State down the line? And it's going to be tough because you know how well Ryan Day is going to recruit. You know Ryan Day is going to be good at, retooling, getting somebody else as far as getting a system that's going to work for him, that's going to work for Ohio State and the players that they have. I don't see Brian doing that. And to me as well, when you look at some of these coaching spots, and I say this more in the NFL than I do college, when you look at a spot that's open, you have to look at what's my chances of being successful if I go to the spot. Now, I know for some people it's not just about being successful, it's about the challenge, it's about building the program, it's about building it up. And that's kind of, to me, an old school mentality of, you can't just come out of the gate being good, inherit a great team, and then expect to be considered a great coach. You have to work your way up towards it. And I don't necessarily disagree. There is going to come a point where that's going to happen. Even if you inherit a really good roster, you're eventually going to be tested. And then that's how you determine whether or not you're truly a good coach or not after that point. But if I'm Brian Hartline, yes, Penn State's an attractive job, but you look at where they're at with Penn State. They can recruit well. They're always probably going to recruit well. It's a big national brand. They're almost always in the spotlight. They've got money. They've produced quality NFL players. People know about Penn State. They're not going to have an issue when it comes to that. But when it comes to what do these kids want as far as success goes, like if I'm going to Penn State, okay, how far are we going to go? Am I not only competing for a national title? Now, obviously, money is going to probably play a bigger factor into this now than ever before. And it's, at least for college football fans, at least for me personally, I would assume that's kind of disappointing that it's more for the money instead of I want to not only compete, but I want to compete for a championship. So now, if I'm a kid trying to go to Penn State, are we going to beat Ohio State? Are we going to beat Oregon? Are we going to beat Michigan? And now that James Franklin is gone, we've already started to see a number of recruits start to decommit from Penn State. Now, one, where do those recruits go? And two, if I'm a recruit going there with a head coach, what are our chances of doing that? Ohio State always recruits well. They're always just basically reloading, and it's a whole brand new, darn near championship roster, if not a championship roster. Same with Oregon. Michigan's on a little bit of a downslope, mainly because, Jim Harbaugh didn't really recruit very far into the future, post him being there. I think once he won the Natty, it was kind of in the cards that he was going to leave, and that ended up coming to fruition. So Michigan's on a little bit of a downslope, but they're going to start to make a comeback eventually. And when they do, Michigan's going to be a team that Penn State's going to have to deal with. And even here in Indiana, you've got the Hoosiers. You've got Coach Cignetti coaching above and beyond his means as far as not having the greatest of recruitment, because a lot of players, they're not used to Indiana being successful. You don't hear of a lot of successful, guys from Indiana in the NFL. So Coach Cignetti's coaching, miles above that. And it'll be interesting to see if he stays at Indiana. What do those players look like when they do go to the NFL? Some of the bigger names that are coming out, obviously Mendoza, Fernando Mendoza is probably going to be one of the biggest if he continues to stay there at IU and he has success. Of if and when he goes to the NFL, what does that look like? Can Coach Cignetti truly develop a guy into being an NFL quality quarterback? Same with the wide receivers, same with the defensive ends, the running backs and whatnot. So that'll be the other interesting thing that Penn State has to try to hurdle, is now you've got all these teams in the Big Ten that are still up and coming, and you may be kind of left at just above middle of the pack. USC with Lincoln Riley still kind of there. They had a big shocking win against Michigan. UCLA, ever since they upset Penn State, they went up to East Lansing. They dominated the Spartans, which I was personally very surprised about. Indiana gets an upset win over Oregon. And then you've still got, Maryland is there with Malik Washington, who's a true freshman. I think he's going to be fantastic. He looks fantastic this year to boot, which is going to be tough for anybody to have to deal with if they have to go to Maryland. And don't forget about Washington. I mean, Washington is also having a solid year. They're just a couple of years removed from being in a college football playoff themselves. Now, obviously, they had a little bit of a down year the following season, but I mean, this year they've looked solid, and they gave now, albeit they did lose to Ohio State, they gave them a good run for their money in the first half of the game. So don't don't necessarily disqualify them either. So if I'm Penn State, you're kind of stuck there with the Purdue's, with the Northwesterns, with the Rutgers. A lot of the bottom parts of the Big Ten right now. Wisconsin, who knows what's going to happen with Wisconsin? I think Luke Fickle's probably going to be the next guy fired just because of how badly they were completely blown out against Iowa in Camp Randall up in Wisconsin. Not a single point scored. Iowa absolutely dominated them, and I didn't expect Iowa to have an offense at all. You've got Nebraska, who's kind of on the up and up. Which, speaking of Nebraska, Matt Rule is one of those coaches that may be considered for the Penn State job. Matt Rule's a big name I've heard. I've heard Brian Kelly for LSU, which I will say, being an LSU fan, I feel it's kind of the same situation as James Franklin. Brian Kelly does really well with recruiting. He can build a team really well. He can't coach a team very well, which is the problem. And people may or may not disagree with that. But when I look at Brian Kelly, when I look at the talent that he's had on this LSU team before, because keep in mind, not so long ago, he had Jaden Daniels as his quarterback. He had Malik Neighbors as a wide receiver. He had Brian Thomas Jr. as a wide receiver, and he had Mason Taylor. Oh, and his starting left tackle was Will Campbell. He had quality talent on that LSU team that, not only did he, inherit, that he recruited, that he helped bring in, he helped coach, and they didn't really do anything with it. They went to the SEC. They won the SEC West. They went to the SEC championship and got blown out by Georgia, which, in his defense, that was on, one of Georgia's championship runs. So I can and can't fault him for that to an extent, but he has all this talent and he doesn't do anything with it. So to me, Brian Kelly is just honestly the SEC version of Penn State, but he's potentially linked to going up there. And we already know that he left Notre Dame because he felt that LSU was built more to win national championships. Now, I don't know if he'll go to Penn State with kind of that same mindset of, it's possible. You still have to face a pretty top-heavy Big Ten conference as a whole with, again, all the teams that I mentioned. So, I mean, he could potentially do that, but I don't necessarily know how successful he would be if he does go there. So I know Brian Kelly, Matt Rule is one. There's another name, Manny Diaz, the head coach of Duke, is potentially rumored to, maybe throw his hat in the ring because he was a defensive coordinator for the Nittany Lions at one point, and it'd be a step up from Duke. We'll put it that way. But it was interesting that James Franklin finally fired after 11 seasons. Again, I felt he was solid. They're 3-3. They lost their starting quarterback. And here's the other thing that I've always felt is weird is you bring this coach in, and the coach's job is to build a culture, build a locker room, get guys in that believe in his system, and they're going to spread his message in the locker room so that he can build a program and he can build everything up. And you fire a guy like now James Franklin had 11 years. So I mean, I get why maybe they fire him midseason, but it is also a chance to see, okay, what can you do now that your starting quarterback is down? You've lost 3 games in a row. How do you finally rebound? Because Penn State hasn't hit their bye week yet. Who knows? They hit their bye week. Maybe let's get everything reestablished. Let's go back to the fundamentals, get back to basics. Let's see who the backup quarterback is. How is he going to do in this situation? Because who knows? Maybe you do have that next guy in line post Drew Aller ready to go, or hopefully you do as far as recruiting goes. And if not, okay, I already know at this point I'm probably going to have to hit the transfer portal. Now, are the playoffs probably out of sight? Yes. Is a successful season out of sight? Not necessarily. You could still have a successful season. You just have to give him a chance to at least try. And as some people have kind of said it, at least online in the comments that I've read, that they could have done James Franklin a little bit more respect as far as giving him the opportunity to at least finish the season and fire him. To me, it just doesn't make sense to do it 6 games into the season. The season isn't completely lost yet. you could still potentially do something. Now, again, I think national title aspirations are out the door, but you never know what else you could potentially do, though. Another guy that was actually fired that, again, I'm kind of surprised because he didn't get a chance to really be a head coach that long, is Trent Bray for Oregon State. Now, I know Oregon State, not the biggest or sexiest brand by no means, but he's another one that was kind of in the same situation of he inherited an Oregon State team after Jonathan Smith left to become the head coach of Michigan State. Jonathan Smith took a lot of talent with him there to the Spartans in East Lansing. He went 5-7 as a head coach at Oregon, or no, sorry, Oregon State, not Oregon, Oregon State. And this year he starts out 0-7 and they fire him. And again, to me, is that indicative of coaching or is it just indicative of a hard season? Because I mean, Oregon State is trying to play quality opponents and tough opponents. I mean, they faced Houston. They had to face Oregon. Like, they're not facing the stereotypical cupcake schedules. Like, Oregon State is trying to prove that they are still a Power 4 school, and they're trying to keep that Power 4 relevance by having a decent schedule. Now, albeit I hate the term quality losses, that still does count for something. Now, if they're out here losing to, like group of 5 schools and they're just getting blown out and whatnot, okay, that's a different story. That's a little bit more of a mess. But if you're facing a true quality opponent, someone, like Houston that's now in the Big 12, Oregon, who's a, absolute powerhouse and dominating the Big 10. And yes, you lose, but your competition is better. The old expression of iron sharpens iron type of thing. Now, I don't expect them to then turn around and beat the snot out of anybody by no stretch of the imagination. But to me, you have to give them a little bit of credit at the fact of they do try to make an effort of, look, we're going to compete against quality opponents. You can't say that we're trying to ride the cupcake train and get easy wins. We need to be prepared as a football team for if we do go somewhere and if we do something, that we're going to be able to truly compete, in a realistic manner. But I feel bad for Trent Bray, though. And I don't know if they're trying to give him kind of the timing factor because he's been with Oregon State since 2018. So he's been there 7 years. He was the linebackers coach for 3. He was the defensive coordinator / linebackers coach for 1 season from 2022 to 2023. And then after Jonathan Smith left, then he became the head coach of Oregon State. So he's been there. He knows the area and he knows the team. I don't necessarily say you could say that as he's had a chance to establish his culture and get his guys in there. Not necessarily true. While yes, he's picking up where Jonathan Smith left off, Jonathan Smith took a lot of that with him, and he's going to do things differently than Jonathan Smith. And that's okay because he's going to take, different parts of where he's learned and what he's done, as he becomes a head coach. I always think it's weird when they fire people this early into the season for kind of honestly no good reason. Like, you go into the off season, you spend all this time and money with people and you just fire them that early in. Like, to me, that's what I think is crazy about a lot of this is why would you do that? Why would you set yourself up to kind of fail from the beginning? If you didn't want them, why didn't you just let them go? But that's just me. I've gone off on a huge TED talk on that. So we'll keep moving forward as far as the college football topics. I love college football. This is something that I really wanted to talk about because I felt passionate about it. I don't have a whole lot to talk about as far as the NFL goes, so I got to kind of backfill with college nonetheless. But the Hoosiers, like I said earlier, get a big win against Oregon up in Eugene. First team to do that as far as Oregon being in the Big Ten. Oregon technically was undefeated in Big Ten conference play in the regular season, and Indiana is the first team to hand them a loss. Technically, Indiana, I haven't seen the statistic, but I heard this from a diehard IU fan. IU is the first Big Ten team to go up to Oregon and get a win since like 2004, 2005, and then they do it again 20 years later under Coach Cignetti. And my question is, do we think this Hoosiers team is for real? Because they were able to get a top quality win against an Oregon team that, is a top 5 team. And even though they dropped in the rankings, I still think Oregon is a top 5 team, to be 100% honest with you. I think the Hoosiers are legit. It's one of those, when you looked at Indiana's schedule, this is one of the games that they had to win. And And a lot of that is just due to the fact of, people criticized Indiana last year because they did get the benefit. They had a schedule break. They didn't have to face really anybody tough except for Ohio State. Technically, they did have to face Michigan, but they ended up getting the win against them. They face Ohio State, they lose, and then they had to face Notre Dame, first round of the playoffs, and they lose. Only two losses were to the two teams who ended up being in the national championship, which is pretty solid for them. Then you look at IU's schedule this year, and at least my first thought was, okay, this might be a little bit rough. Now, the benefit, IU doesn't have to face Ohio State this year. Their toughest, so this is their schedule as far as the stretch that I thought was going to be rough for them. They had to host Illinois, who they ended up putting a massive thumping on. Illinois was ranked 9th at the time. They had to go to Iowa, hard place to play. They get the win. They had to go to Oregon, even tougher. No big team, Big Ten team had won up there in a long time. They get the win. Now they host Michigan State. Probably will be a win. They have to host UCLA. Now, depending on if UCLA starts to get cold again or if they trip up on their own feet, that could maybe be a trap game. Now, the next two games that they have to go to Maryland. I think that's going to be a lot more difficult for them than what people may believe. And I know Maryland's sitting here. They're 4-2. They lost to Washington, and then they lost to Nebraska. Malik Washington has Maryland believing, and the fact that it's a road game doesn't also necessarily put any favorability in that. But then they also have to go to Penn State. Now, I think that game is a lot more winnable now that James Franklin is fired and Drew Eller is gone. Mainly being because Penn State will probably kind of have and we don't really care, the season lost at this point, but they may also come into it of, we're just here to try to spoil IU's year and spoil their fun, and maybe trip the Hoosiers up. But then they host Wisconsin, very winnable, and then they have to go to Purdue, also very winnable. Now, albeit that is a rivalry game, so that could be a trap because records typically go out the door whenever you face your rivals and whatnot, typically. So I mean, this Oregon game, though, is one that Indiana absolutely had to win. They do get the win, as far as being one of the biggest tests that they had to deal with. So already IU has two top quality ranked wins. Now they don't have any ranked teams left unless Maryland or Penn State, one of them maybe sneaks back into the top 25. But to me, they've already solidified their resume as far as, being able to make a case that they should go to maybe even the Big Ten championship game. We'll have to see. And if they do hold a tiebreaker over Oregon. So we never know. Maybe IU makes the Big Ten championship game. Now, if you would have told me that, or if I would have said that about 3 years ago, people would have said I'm nuts. I would have said I'm nuts. But it's cool to be able to see it, that's a potential reality now, 2025 with Coach Cignetti. I think it's pretty awesome. And then probably last topic of at least the first half, Arch Manning and Texas get a huge win over Oklahoma in a way that I don't know if anybody was truly expecting, except maybe the people who are fans of the Red River rivalry. For Texas to dominate 23-6 is crazy. Now, there are a couple things that I had issues with this game of Texas versus Oklahoma. Oklahoma brought John Mateer back. Keep in mind, John Mateer had just had surgery on his hand, about 17 days ago at the time. He's 20 of 38, 202 yards, and he had 3 picks. Now, he's also known for being a runner. I don't know if it was just the fact of Texas's defense, really stifled him and stopped him from running, or if he's trying to protect himself as far as maybe re-injuring that hand goes. But the fact that Oklahoma even risked it is kind of what's crazy to me. Now, to Oklahoma's benefit, at least when they lost, that put Texas back in the ranking system, albeit they're low in their ranking system. They're at least back in the top 25. So at least Oklahoma can say that they lost to another ranked team, which is a benefit for them. But if I'm Oklahoma, I don't know if I would have risked John Mateer coming back like that, especially with how good he's been, the quality of season that he's had, the level of which he's brought Oklahoma back to. now in their second season in the SEC. So I'll be honest, after last year with Jackson Arnold, with all the injuries that Oklahoma had, I thought Oklahoma was dead in the water. I didn't think that they would be able to compete well in the SEC to start with. Just because I'll be honest, I don't have that much faith in Brent Venables as a head coach. But this year, especially with getting John Mateer, completely flipped the script. Defensively, they're tremendously better. Now, health and injuries is still a little bit of an issue with Oklahoma. But the fact that they're sitting here at 5-1, they're still in the race for the college football playoffs and whatnot is impressive. Now, on the other hand, for Arch Manning, and this is kind of a question to everybody now, are we finally able to have a little bit more confidence in Arch? I'm not going to sit here and ask if Arch is still, the next college prodigy, the next greatest thing to hit college football. By no means. I think we've seen throughout the season with his struggles of not really being able to win on the road until this game, of not being able to show out and have quality games against quality Power 4 opponents, that I'm not writing him off. But I also don't think it's fair to say that he's, he finally got a quality win. Statistically, I mean, he was 21 of 27, 166 yards and a touchdown, which is solid. I mean, for considering the fact it's against Oklahoma's defense, he also had 34 rushing yards to boot on 4 carries. So, I mean, he put up decent numbers. Now, again, they're not gaudy. They're not what we would probably expect from a Manning. And I mentioned this even on the last show. He kind of reminds me more of Eli than he does Peyton. Peyton was very much of, he's very cerebral. He's going to study you. He's going to break down the defense. He's going to move the offense around and be able to match your defense, to be able to break it apart and be able to, maximize his potential out of it. Eli was more of just kind of the, backyard brawler, gunslinger type of quarterback. And that to me is kind of what, Arch is. He's just a little bit more athletic and he's a little bit more of a runner than either of the Manning brothers were when they were in the NFL. I don't really know much on their college years because I'll be honest, Peyton was in college when I was very young and I wasn't really watching college football when Eli was in. So I think for people who maybe have a little bit of hate on Arch, I think this kind of proved he can hang with the big boys. Again, this is his first year starting, so we're going to see a little bit of some hiccups and whatnot from Arch. We're going to see a little bit of hiccups from Texas as a whole. I think that they did need to address the fact of, they lost some key starters on that offensive line. The wide receiver room has definitely taken a step back as compared to what they had last year. Defensively, Texas is still solid, and they proved it against Oklahoma. It's just the offense has not been as complimentary. Now, I think as the year goes on, Texas will potentially get better. I still think they'll probably have a couple trip-up games. I don't expect them to, repeat as far as going to the SEC championship. Now, they do get a bit of a schedule break as far as that goes because they have to go to Kentucky. They have to go to Mississippi State. They host Vandy. Now, Vandy could be a kind of a tough outing. They have to go to Georgia. Now, can they potentially get over the boogeyman that is Georgia? And what does Georgia look like that late into the season? They host Arkansas, and then they host Texas A&M, who is, the next highest ranked team that they had to face. And at the current moment, Texas A&M is ranked 4th. So they do have a little bit of a tough outing ahead, but they could potentially finish 8-4, which not great compared to where they finished last year, but also not bad. And I think that is realistically possible. Now, again, that's depending on if every game goes the way I think they do. Maybe they get an upset win here and there. Maybe they don't. But I think as the season goes on, Arch will get better. He'll be a little bit more comfortable. And then I think come next year, we can have a little bit of a better discussion of, is Arch truly the next greatest thing to hit college football? And is he going to truly be able to be developed into an NFL talent, NFL caliber and NFL talented quarterback? But we will have to wait and see nonetheless, though. But we are going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk more on the NFL side and whatnot. But in the meantime, we're going to play You Can't Spell Hero Without Her.
Signed up to fight for freedom. What a price you had to pay. Picture in a helmet, missing family every day. Your Lady Liberty, dressed like G.I. Jane. Some scars we'll never see. She will never be the same. She's a mother, she's a daughter. She's a sister and a friend. Standing tall in that uniform until the very end. When Uncle Sam called, she signed that line to serve. 'Cause you can't spell hero without her. On that old dusty base with the meadows that shine, she's been to hell and back for the stars and the stripes. Your Lady Liberty, dressed like G.I. Jane, and some scars we'll never see, and she will never be the same. She's a mother, she's a daughter, she's a sister and a friend. Standing tall in that uniform until the very end. When Uncle Sam called, she signed that line to serve. 'Cause you can't spell hero without her. Yeah, yes. For the ones that didn't make it, we will pause and then we cry. We can still see their smile in every sunrise. She's a mother, she's a daughter, she's a sister and a friend. Standing tall in that uniform until the very end. When Uncle Sam called, she signed that line to serve. 'Cause you can't spell hero without her. 'Cause you can't spell hero without her.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to Inside the Hoosier Mind, brought to you by Military Broadcast Veterans, helping give veterans a voice. Shout out to Coffee Anderson for his song, You Can't Spell Hero Without Her. He's a big supporter of MBR and veterans as a whole, and definitely thank him for allowing us the rights and being able to use that song. But we are back to talk some NFL football, though. Crazy week 6 in the NFL as well. You had the Eagles fall to the Giants. Jackson Dart and Cam Scatterbo decided that, hey, we're now NFL players and we're going to show Philadelphia how to do it. And Cam Scatterbo showed why he hits his head against brick walls. And that is a true thing. He is apparently noted that Cam Scatterbo actually used to run up and hit his head on brick walls to try to run through them as he was younger. And I'm pretty sure he still does that even now as he's older and in the NFL. But it's crazy the amount of dysfunction that is in the NFL right now, from some of these teams, and is from some of these teams, the teams and the head coaches and whatnot in the NFL. And I say that because let's look at the first one with the Chargers and the Dolphins. The Chargers ended up winning 29-27. The Dolphins are 1-5 after losing 29-27. And apparently they're already holding players-only meetings at the Dolphins facilities. No coaches allowed. And apparently that's kind of a telltale sign of your season's already going down the drain, is when you've got players-only meeting without the coaches. And at least from a fan perspective from the outside, that's a really weird thing to do. Because I get it. Maybe you think if, us as the players get together, we need to try to meet after work. We need to try to meet and figure out what we're doing. It's kind of your opportunity to do that with your coaches, with the guys that are running things, with the guys that are calling your plays, doing the schemes? Is it something that guys just aren't understanding? Are they missing assignments? Is it the fact of, hey, we have lost quality players, so how can we make up the difference of that? How can we potentially, cover up, or at least, slow the the hemorrhaging of yardage and bad plays, and making up the difference for not having the quality of players anymore, because they've either lost to free agency, trade, injury, whatever the case may be. And then for Tua to come out and openly call his teammates out as far as, oh, well, there's guys not showing up to player only meetings. Well, they're not really mandatory. And to be honest, if I'm a player doing that, why am I going to waste my time going into a meeting with other players when we're supposed to be doing that with the coaches anyway? I don't need to sit there and listen to guys like, oh, this is how we're supposed to do this is how we're supposed to do this. Because if that was the case, one, you wouldn't need coaches to start with, and two, the Dolphins wouldn't be 1-5. And obviously it's not making much of a difference anyway, if that is the case. So it's weird that Tua is kind of calling out the leadership when you would probably consider Tua one of the leaders for Miami. And the fact that he's calling out Mike McDaniel and whatnot is crazy to me. I think Mike McDaniel will probably be the next NFL coach fired after Brian Callahan was fired from Tennessee. And I do kind of get it, but at the same time, when I look at the coaching position for Miami, you're already in a fairly tough division. You were in a tough division for years, no matter what, because you had Tom Brady there constantly. Now you have Josh Allen and the Bills. Now you have the Patriots potentially back with Drake May. So now you're potentially trying to fight for second, third spot at the best with the AFC East. So if I'm potentially trying to be the head coach of the Dolphins, do you really want to deal with that? And I think for a lot of people, what they need to remember too, while location does play a factor for a lot of these guys, a lot of it ultimately is winning. And the Miami Dolphins have not had a winning culture for a while. They haven't done much. Hi, Mike. I appreciate that, buddy. Go Bears, by the way. The Bears got to win. Don't have to worry about the Bears taking an L this week. The Bears got to win. So if I'm Mike McDaniel, and if I'm any head coach that's looking at Miami, again, you don't have the benefit of, oh, look at all the great players we got. Tyreek Hill obviously seems like he wants out. They got rid of Christian Wilkins. They got rid of, if I remember correctly, Mike Gesicki was also on the Dolphins. They got rid of a solid tight end. You do have Jalen Waddle, solid. The offensive line definitely needs some work. The defense is meh. It used to be good. The defense is just kind of meh at this point. And if I'm Mike McDaniel, do you want to stay and continue to have to deal with that? Because the other issue that almost every Miami coach has to deal with, and it just seems like they've never been able to overcome it, is come January and February, you have to play in the cold. And Miami does not do well playing in the cold. So you either have to do really well at the beginning of the season to be able to lock up the 1 seed and hope like hell you can just have everything run through you, and then maybe win a couple road games, or maybe one at worst, in the cold, to be able to, truly make a run for it. But it's weird how Miami is. And with Tua as well, if I'm the head coach of the Dolphins, are you looking to replace Tua? And people might say I'm crazy for that. They just signed him to a massive contract, so financially they're probably not going to be able to do it. But when I'm looking at Miami and I'm looking at Tua, he's taken a lot of hits. He is injury prone. It's not that I don't think he's solid. He's actually better than what I thought he was going to be. He's better from what I thought he was going to be, especially as an Alabama quarterback, having been, the benefit of having first round talent absolutely everywhere around him during the best of those Nick Saban era. And I don't know if I'm Mike McDaniel, if I want to deal with that. There's rumors that maybe he'll try to go into college and become a head coach. Maybe he goes back to being a coordinator. Who kind of knows? But if I'm him, and if I'm really any coach, do I want to go down to Miami and have to deal with that? Because again, the expectations are going to be high for whatever reason. even though Miami really hasn't done much over the years anyway, even when they have had pretty decent amounts of talent. And again, you have a fan base that's passionate, but it seems like to me Miami is kind of, and if anybody wants to correct me and tell me I'm wrong, you can tell me. But at least watching it from a fan's perspective, looking at the stands and whatnot, and nobody's going to go when they're losing or pretty poorly anyway. It just seems like Miami is one of those places that if they're losing, people just kind of turn it off, brush it out of their minds. They don't really do with it. Right now, they have the Hurricanes, and the Canes are doing great in college football. They're the number 2 team in the country. People are probably paying more attention to that than they are the Miami Dolphins. But that's just me looking at it from a fan perspective, just looking at it. And then on the other hand, because speaking of dysfunction and what are you doing, you have the Cleveland Browns. They lose to the Steelers 9-23, and they trade away Joe Flacco to inside of your own division to the Cincinnati Bengals, who also have quarterback issues because they lost Joe Burrow essentially to start the season in week 2. Why would you do that if you're the Cleveland Browns? Like, there's already kind of the unwritten rule that teams in the division, they don't really do a whole lot of trades very often anyway, because why do I want the person that I'm supposed to go up against twice a year, maybe even 3, depending on how the playoffs go? Why do I want you to get better? And if I'm Cleveland, you do have to face Cincinnati again at some point, and you trade your starting quarterback, the guy that you began the season with, the guy that you signed during the offseason, the guy that you did all the offseason camp with and whatnot. You sign him, you roll with him, and then you trade him 6 weeks into the season. Why? Like, why would you ever do that in the NFL? Like, to me that's nuts. Of you, and this is what it was broken down to this morning. And I thought it was a great take and a great segment. You have to think of what the Browns quarterback roster looked like to start the season. They had Joe Flacco, they had Kenny Pickett. They ended up signing Tyler Huntley very, very short amount of time. They do still technically have Deshaun Watson, albeit he's hurt, and between all the allegations, everything like that, Deshaun Watson is essentially done in Cleveland. They just have to finish out his contract as far as painting goes. And then you draft 2 guys in Dylan Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders. And so then to start the season, they've traded away Pickett. They still technically have Watson. They release Huntley. So they have Flacco, they have Gabriel at the number 2, and then you have Shedeur. And pretty much all offseason, that's all we heard about was the Cleveland Browns quarterback room. That probably had the most media attention I've seen the Cleveland Browns have ever. Of, oh, what are they going to do? What is this team going to look like? How are they going to do? What does Shedeur look like? What does Dylan look like? They've both had solid camps. They both had solid practices. And you go with the veteran guy because you feel, okay, he's been here before. He's made it work. We had success with him. Joe's experienced. The kids can sit back and learn from Joe. Okay, no problem. And then you trade him to Cincinnati, who loses their starting quarterback, when, albeit Cincinnati has a terrible offensive line, a defense that is slightly better, but again, their offense doesn't help keep them, off the field. So the defense is on constantly. So they are giving up the yardage and the numbers that they probably wouldn't be if they had a complementary offense with them. And you give a team that has Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Mike Gesicki, and Noah Fant, you give them a quarterback like Joe Flacco, who, well, I don't expect him to go crazy. I don't expect him to go on this big undefeated streak with Cincinnati. You still give your division rival a better chance and put them in a better position than they were when they had Jake Browning as the starting quarterback in place of Joe Burrow. Like, why as Cleveland would you do that? Because to me, when you look at the 2 rookies, what is the thing that the rookies need the most? They need the reps. They need the practice. They need to see what the game looks like. They need to get a feel. They need to build chemistry with the other guys that are on their roster. And the other guys have to know, okay, what is this guy going to do if something breaks down? Where is this guy looking? Where is he going to put the ball placement? Especially as a wide receiver, is he going to be the guy that throws the ball, 90 miles an hour out of his hand? Is he going to be the one that puts it up and I have to go get it? Is he going to put it over the shoulder? All of these different things that come into play, and you take those reps away from him because you're going with Joe. The season starts out awful, which why are people really surprised? And not really people, but more of the Browns organization. Why are you surprised at that? Because your wide receiver room is a mess. Your offensive line could potentially be solid. You have a great defense. Awesome. You paid a ton of money into it and you drafted well for your defense. You should have a good defense. But your running game is not really there, even though you drafted two solid guys in Dylan Sampson and Quentin Judkins. And you drafted two rookie quarterbacks and you don't even really give them a shot. Like, yeah, each kind of had their, their time in the preseason, and they've gotten some. Well, Dylan has gotten basically all of the reps in the regular season. But again, if you weren't going to stick with Joe throughout the whole way, why even keep him? It, to me, if it would have truly been a fair evaluation, and if it's one of those you already kind of know the season is going to be a wash anyway, why not see what you have? Why not? Hey, Joe's going to be here if we need him to be, but we already know the season isn't going to go well. Let's see what we've got in the two rookies. Let's just see, because you can't get any worse than how you're already losing, because you're not putting up great points. You're not doing anything sexy. You don't really do anything well other than defense. Why not give the kids a shot? Maybe they'll surprise you. Maybe something happens. Maybe it gives a spark. Who knows? But it's just crazy that Cincinnati was able to get Joe Flacco. And again, not saying it makes them any better, but it makes them better than what they were. And the fact that Cleveland said, yeah, we don't really care enough about you, Flacco, to really feel that that's going to hurt us or bite us back in the butt later. So here you go, is nuts to me. And it really makes me wonder, what is the Cleveland Browns as an organization doing that they feel, we can get rid of the guy that, is our starting quarterback technically, and trade him to an in-division rival. It's not, even Mike Tomlin was like, why are you doing that? Like, why would you ever do that? Like, even Mike Tomlin, who's, he just beat the Cleveland Browns, he's got no issues, is like, why would you ever do that? Mike and us as a country, as football fans, we're all asking the same question. Why would you ever do that? But who knows? We may not ever truly get an answer from it. But then, of course, the last little bit for the NFL wise, the Titans fire their head coach, which, again, kind of the same thing of, you have the guy all off season, and he's the one that, helps draft the number one quarterback that you had in Cam Ward, who isn't talked about much. And in Cam Ward's defense, there's not a whole lot of bright spots there in Tennessee. You have Calvin Ridley. Yes, Tony Pollard can be solid when he's able to kind of break out, and he doesn't have to be a true run. He can be more of a speedy running back than a power running back. That's about it. That's about all Cam Ward has to work with. And to me, this does two things. You're setting Cam Ward up for failure, because now the guy that drafted him doesn't even make it a full season. So now he has to learn. I'm not going to say he has to learn another system, but now he has to deal with a second guy as head coach. It's not even his first full year. It's not even halfway through the season yet. He's already got to deal with another coach. And for Tennessee, why would you put yourself in that situation? If you didn't feel that he was going to be the guy, why did you keep him? Like, we've seen how many teams like, oh man, this guy did poor, very poor at the last season. Let's just fire him and bring in somebody new. You could have had a multitude of potentially other coaches that you put, at least interviewed and said, maybe this is the guy. You didn't have to stick with him. And to me, it's also weird that this is a team that, okay, we're going to ride with the head coach. He's got the number one overall pick in the quarterback. We feel we have our guy of the future. Cam Ward is solid. Let's see what we can do. They're able to get you a win because the Cardinals just absolutely, crap the bed. And the Titans are able to get their first win of the season, which I don't think anybody expected them to do. I kind of felt that between the Titans and New Orleans, it would just be a race for who's going to be the worst. The Jets have apparently decided to, enter the conversation with that. And like you really thought that Cam was going to be able to overcome all the shortcomings that you have as an organization. Like, the offensive line isn't great. The defense needs a lot of work. Again, your major weapon is Calvin Ridley. That's about it. You released a lot of guys that you had, drafted very highly before and just haven't seemed to pan out, or you just weren't developed correctly. And you think that this quarterback, who's a rookie, is just going to come in and fix all that, and it's going to save your head coach's job. Like, to me, that's just nuts as an organization that they would even remotely consider that. Now, I don't know if that's true. Again, looking from the outside, looking in, that's what it seems that they're kind of going with is, oh, no, it'll work. That makes no sense to me. Like, we've seen how many number 1 overall picks go into the NFL. They don't get a whole lot of wins to start their career, because you don't have a lot of teams like Indy when they bring in an Andrew Luck, where there is a solid core. It needed a lot of work. It needed a lot of overhaul, and they kind of went, very young, very quickly. But Andrew Luck was also kind of a different era and a different guy just altogether as far as how he played. No offense to Cam Ward. I watched him at Washington State. I watched him at Miami. Cam Ward is solid. He doesn't have even decent supporting cast members there in Nashville, and they expect him to just be able to make magic with it. And that's just not realistic. Trevor Lawrence wasn't able to do it. Trevor Lawrence even went and won a national championship. He even went to 2 national championships, and he won one. Like, if that dude can't do it, no offense to Cam, I don't think Cam's going to be able to do it. So it's just nuts that some of these teams are making these weird trades to in-division rivals, organizations firing coaches, partway through the season, when it's like, if you didn't think he was the guy to start with, why did you even keep him? Like, at least college-wise with James Franklin, it's like, okay, we should be good. We're a preseason top 5 team. We're a potential, contender and favorite for the national title. College makes sense. NFL, it's like, maybe this isn't really the guy, just based off of how we did last year, because you did bad enough. You got the number 1 overall pick. Like, what did you really expect him to be able to do within just a couple of years of being the head coach? Like, that, again, that to me is nuts. But nonetheless, though, I appreciate everybody tuning in, all the comments, all the love and whatnot. Thank you all again. I really do appreciate it. If you liked everything that you heard, or if you want to ever, reach out, talk more, love to always talk, talk ball, spit theories back and forth with each other and whatnot. All of my social media is at Inside the Hoosier Mind. And if you want to hear more from great military veteran hosts and people that you can get great advice from, great stories from, great conversations from, definitely check out Military Broadcast Radio, or MBR Radio. From the visual side, there's a little QR code right here, and then all of their socials all the way across. Or you can just type in Military Broadcast Radio in your Google search. It'll pop up. You can meet all the hosts. You can meet all their shows and whatnot. It's absolutely great. You can even donate to the cause if you want to. They are doing a wreath donation every single year around Christmas time, or just before Christmas time. There's actually wreaths donated to Arlington National Cemetery, and there's volunteers that go out and lay wreaths on the final resting place of so many veterans from so many years across the war, from so many wars across the years. And it's just a really cool and very humbling experience to get to do. And if you go to MBR Radio, Military Broadcast Radio, you could potentially make a donation to have a wreath placed on a fallen hero's grave. And I know a lot of the families would definitely appreciate that. But appreciate everybody tuning in. Hope everybody enjoyed, and we will be back next week.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Military Broadcast Radio. As we wrap up today's show, we want to remind you that the podcast of today's episode will be available right after we go off the air. So if you missed any part of the show or want to listen again, be sure to check it out. And remember, we're here to support and honor our veterans. Your stories and experiences matter, and we are committed to giving you a platform to share them. That's right. We're here to give our veterans a voice. So don't forget to catch the podcast and stay connected with us. Giving our veterans a voice.